Hello and welcome to the Man On podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the podcast. We're going to be interviewing a number of guests through the journey of doing this. We're going to be focusing on a lot of your key themes. For those that don't know, Man On Inverclyde is a mental health and wellbeing and suicide prevention charity based in Greenock. So a lot of the themes that we might be talking about might be triggering for some people. And we just want to put a wee disclaimer out at the start. If you are triggered by any of the content of some of your discussions, then please get in touch with us. You can get in touch with us through social media at Man On Inverclyde, but also as well you can get in contact with us through email address support@manoninverclyde.com, and we can guide you to what would be the best sort of contact for yourself to do that. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoy the podcast. So welcome back to another episode of the Man On podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Haylis Smith, who is the National Delivery Lead for Suicide Prevention. Haylis, how are you doing?
Good, thanks Chris, good to be here.
Yeah, good to be here. Well travelled this morning, took you a few hours to get here.
Yep, well, made it through the M8 traffic and the rain, so we're here. And we've met halfway. As you can see, we're in the G4 studio in Wishaw. So we're delighted to be back here. We're going to be recording a few more episodes towards our sort of mission, if you like, to deliver a suicide prevention podcast. And as I said, delighted to have you with us today, Haylis. So for people that are watching it, they're maybe not sure about the job title or what that involves, can you just tell us a little bit about your role, how that's impacted in suicide prevention, and probably a wee bit about why you get involved in suicide prevention generally? Yeah, maybe I should start at the beginning rather than talk about the role first. So, my uncle died by suicide when I was 16, and that had a very big impact on my life. And I guess when that happened and I saw the devastation that it caused in our family, my thought process was we need to do stuff to stop this from happening to other families and to other individuals who felt suicidal, wanted to do something to prevent that too. So I had always wanted to be a nurse. I became a general nurse. I couldn't do that because I injured my back, and then went back to uni and did psychology and sociology at uni. And yeah, I guess that made me think about where do I join these things that I wanted to do from my personal life with the sort of professional qualifications that I had. I'd volunteered as a Samaritan as well for a while, so and at that time the first strategy in Scotland for suicide prevention, Choose Life, was launched, and they were looking for a coordinator in the Borders, which is where I live, and I applied and got that job, and I think that was a feeling then that all the bits of the puzzle were kind of coming together, and I was going to get to use my lived experience to help shape the professional stuff. So I've worked since 2004. I sort of measure it in height of my youngest daughter, because she was 6 months old when I started as a Choose Life lead in Borders, and she's now 19 and a half, so I can measure it in how tall she's become. And I've worked in and around suicide prevention. I did the Choose Life job for a number of years, and then wanted to kind of broaden my understanding of mental health and addictions, and so I worked for a while as the sort of mental health strategy and commissioning manager in Borders, and gained a lot more understanding, I think, of how the service areas worked, and gained a different kind of perspective on things as well. So I think I've got quite a balanced view of how things are, how they might be in the future. And then I moved into a role in COSLA back into suicide prevention, just because I felt it was time for a bit of a change again, as much as anything else. And as a part of that role, I helped write the Creating Hope Together strategy and action plan along with the Scottish Government. And as we were writing that strategy, we wanted it to be
an outcomes-focused strategy. We wanted to kind of shift from just delivering actions to thinking about what we wanted to achieve by delivering those actions. And we knew that we had lots of people who were really interested and involved, so lots of organisations that had sat as part of the national leadership group. But we also recognised that they were all predominantly within the field of suicide prevention or mental health, and we weren't really touching the inequalities that we know are associated with suicide. So we knew we needed to change the way that we were going to deliver this strategy. And it was felt, we did lots of consultation, it was felt important to have a sort of delivery lead for that, who would work together with strategic outcome leads, and to have an advisory group that had a greater focus on inequalities. So the National Delivery Lead post was advertised and I applied and was fortunate enough to get it. So, and I guess the purpose of that role really is to be able to work alongside lots of different partners. So we have our strategic outcome leads who have, a key role in delivering each of the long-term outcomes. But I think it's much broader than that, and it needs to be much broader than that. So connecting up with other organisations across the country, other individuals across the country who are keen to do something to help us reduce suicide. Because it can't all just happen because we've written a nice strategy and action plan. So I kind of consider myself as a bit of a patchwork quilt maker, that I'm pulling all these different bits together and stitching them together and helping to create the conditions, I guess, that will hopefully help us achieve the outcomes that we've set out.
Yeah, I'm hearing lots in there in terms of obviously your lived experience and the loss, and so many people, as yourself, because you connect with a lot more organisations than I do, but so many people have got a story that's similar to that, because it has a huge impact on us when a suicide does happen, if it's in our family or a friends group. And my example, it's and that could be such a powerful driver. In terms of your work that you're doing now, you've obviously got such a big remit, I would say, from obviously the outside looking in. You're talking there about the sort of creating hope together and the national strategy. Obviously, we connected in Slovenia, which was the first time that I'd met you in person, although we connected sort of virtually and on emails and stuff before that. You had an opportunity to go to Slovenia to obviously talk about that in front of others. And from my sort of take from Slovenia was that Scotland was regarded as sort of leading the way in some cases, or seen as a positive highlight in the people that I spoke to. What was your experience of going over there and sort of delivering that message to a global audience, because it was packed from near enough every country, I think was
and I think from the publication of the Choose Life strategy and action plan in 2003, I think Scotland has always sort of had that place in the world as being, leading the way in having strategies and action plans and delivering sort of innovative work in suicide prevention. I think I was really keen to go and, on that sort of world platform. I actually had, the last time I went to the International Association of Suicide Prevention Conference was in 2005 when it was in Durban, and I did a poster presentation there. So I guess I was really keen not just to show how we've progressed in Scotland, but also to see how other areas have progressed as well, because I think there's an awful lot of learning that you get from being in those kind of conferences and opportunities to meet people from across the world who are also doing exciting and innovative things. So I think it was great to just go and showcase the strategy and the action plan for what it is, because having an outcomes focused strategy, we think, is quite a new thing. It's something that Steve Platt, who's Professor of Suicidology, who I've worked with for many years now, has always, been really keen to see, and I guess we have that now. So you know, and to really think about what that means. I think the other sort of key part that was important was that focus on inequalities, because again, that's not something that we've really had a focus on in the past. We had sort of identification of risk groups in previous strategies, but I think really thinking about what the inequalities are and how they contribute to suicide risk, I think that's new. So to have those two things together, and then I guess the other really important part is the sort of whole of government and society approach that we're taking, which again is new to, you know, to be looking across the policy landscape in Scottish Government and to be thinking, what does suicide prevention mean in those spaces, and to be really driving that forward. You know, I think that again is a different and innovative way of working. So, you know, having that opportunity to connect in Slovenia, you know, I've had sort of contact from people since we came back who were, you know, who heard the presentation, who were keen to sort of hear a bit more. I've connected in with the IASP group that's been set up for European leads, and, you know, I guess part of my hope is that we can share our experience and our knowledge across other areas who aren't as advanced as well. And I think, you know, while my focus is on reducing suicide in Scotland, I don't just want to keep it there. If we can improve things across the world, why would we not want to? So yeah, I thought it was a great opportunity to both connect with yourself and others that you know, were in Scotland and you know, beyond. I think the other thing that was really powerful for me was actually seeing some of the younger researchers who sit on our academic advisory group present their research, and, you know, to get to hear it like that is very different from getting a paper and you know, a report from them. So, you know, I thought it really sort of triggered my brain as to thinking, how can we bring some of that actually to life in Scotland as well, and help share some of that learning that we have some brilliant academics in our own country. So how do we share that with the people who are in Scotland already?
Yeah, no, there was lots of Scottish representation, whether it be from universities. Obviously, Rory O'Connor presented a few times. One of the things that myself and Sam took from our trip over was a big focus on probably two areas, but post-vention support, which we'll talk about later, but also lived experience, which me and you have both touched on already in terms of where that comes from. But there was a real focus on that. There's obviously a lived experience group, focus group as well, that meets that we're going to be involved in, I think, in terms of IASP moving forward. But in terms of lived experience, when you look at the strategy and you look at the work that's happening across, obviously, Scotland, you know, there's a lots of organisations that are championing it at the minute. How important is that for moving forward for suicide prevention in a Scottish context, or global context as well, but in a Scottish context?
Yeah, I mean, from the Every Life Matters action plan, the previous action plan in Scotland, there was you know, a real commitment to work with people with lived experience, and you know, so we created the lived experience panel. We have a youth advisory group. We have a participation network for organisations that work with young people, and you know, the commitment for Every Life Matters was that they were a kind of core part of how we developed work that we were doing, how we made decisions, and you know, we learned an awful lot from them. So that commitment, when, you know, recognising the huge value of that when we were creating Hope Together, two Cretans, was to, you know, make sure that was firmly embedded in the new strategy and action plan as well. So we will continue with those three groups as they are set up just now. We've just recruited new members to the youth advisory group. We've recruited new members to the lived experience panel. And I think, you know, there's absolutely no doubt that hugely shaped how we did things, and how we will continue to do things in the future. There's, you know, I think it's important to get that balance of what the academic evidence is telling us. because we can't get away from what research tells us. And the example I always give is when we were creating the strategy, we had one focus group where lots of people in that group had lived or living experience. And we were talking about locations of concern, and they were saying, you just need to put signs up everywhere. You just need to put signs up. And then people will know, put the Samaritan signs up. And yet the academic evidence tells us that what that can do is contribute to people visiting those locations. So we had to really help the people with lived experience understand why that wasn't a good thing to do in many cases. In some cases it is. While, listening to what they were telling us and really then deciding that what we needed to do was really think about what we do at locations of concern, because that was clearly an area that people with lived experience wanted us to focus on. So I think we've got to balance those things up. And I guess the third thing we've brought in this time, which I don't think we've had such a strong focus on, we've always had the academic evidence, we've always had the lived experience, is around the practice evidence. So what do organisations like Manon tell us is happening in their areas and how they're addressing it? What do our local suicide prevention leads across the country? What are they hearing? What are they seeing? What are they experiencing? And how do we harness that and bring that in to help shape what we do under the strategy and action plan? So I think, the lived experience element, I think you learn so much by doing something or having an experience that, that I know how it felt to be somebody who lost somebody to suicide. I can legitimately sit and say, I know how this feels or how it felt for me as a 16-year-old, who was brought up in a Catholic family. Do you know what all the complicating factors of all of that? But so I think it is vitally important that remains a kind of central part of what we do. I think the other side to the lived experience. So we've invested some funding in Scottish Recovery Network, because I think the other part of lived experience is that peer support element as well, and I think that's that came really strongly through the development of the strategy, was people saying, being able to walk alongside somebody who has had that experience before and who has, either managed their suicidal thoughts or behaviours, or who has been bereaved by suicide and is managing their life with that loss now. I think that is another element of lived experience that's really, really important in terms of what we do in suicide prevention.
Yeah, and I think that's been probably our main driver as a organisation has been that sort of lived experience peer support model. Obviously I set it up in terms of supporting one person, my dad obviously, but I knew it was a lot more widespread than that, and it's evolved since then, but still ultimately that peer support element is still there for us. And probably the other takeaway from Slovenia, which we have touched on, is that post-vention support, that support after suicide, if you like. And that was really, really strong in terms of the events that myself and Sam went to over in Slovenia. And what we have sort of started to work on as a group of people who have been coming into Manon now, and we've been delivering that sort of post-vention bereavement support, but it's volunteers who have had that experience, been able to then sort of link in and support them. And so far it's proven to be, a good support so far, but it's really early days. We've got some funding from the National Lottery Awards for All to deliver it. But how important do you think that's going to be in terms of, because we know about the ripple effect after a suicide, the amount of people that's impacted. How important is it that we're not just trying to work on the prevention bit before it, but we've actually got the support mechanisms if a suicide does happen?
Yeah. I mean, I think the bereavement support is a prevention activity. We know that people who have been bereaved by suicide are at greater risk of suicide themselves. So, I think it's a core part of our strategy. You know, we have a commitment to roll out bereavement support across Scotland. I think it's important that when we do that, we are connecting in with organisations like yourself, and there are others across the country, you know, who are, you know, working to usually to provide some sort of peer support model for people who have been bereaved. It's, you know, it's a bereavement like no other, I think, and, you know, I don't think I'm saying anything that isn't, you know, well founded in the research, that, you know, the feelings, the thoughts, the experiences are very different if you are bereaved by suicide than if you're bereaved in any other way. So, you know, making sure that people get the right kind of support in a timely way, you know, and I guess for as long as they want it. You know, it was 1987 when my uncle died, and, you know, most of the time now I'm absolutely fine and I can, you know, talk about it quite easily and recognise, you know, how that experience benefits me in doing my job now. But then there are other days where, for no apparent reason, a song will come on the radio or somebody will say something and it takes me back to a memory or something, and, you know, and it affects me and I'll be crying, because I do cry a lot anyway. But so
normally a wee grief.
No, yeah, and I think, you know, recognising that it doesn't just happen for a set period of time, that you experience that grief and those strong emotions, but that, you know, it is something that you might experience throughout your life, and being able to just tap into something that gives you a bit of support whenever you might need it, I think is important too.
And some of the feedback that we've had, I suppose, is that sort of, maybe people have went to generic bereavement spaces and they've sort of felt not for them, or they maybe went to a peer support space. We had one person who went into our peer support group and they just didn't feel they wanted to share that loss in there. So having that specific space for people, I think, is really important, because it is unique and it is a, you know, bereavement like no other that you touched on. Another part of what we noticed from, I suppose, going back to Slovenia again, was obviously a lot of focus on children and young people, and you've touched on that. A big gap that we're noticing, I think, for our young people is that sort of 16, sort of 17, maybe even 18 plus range, in terms of supporting them. Our young person service supports sort of 15 plus, so we're in a unique position where a lot of stuff in Inverclyde seems to be focusing on sort of maybe early years, primary school, early secondary. There's a bit of a gap from an Inverclyde perspective in that sort of teenage sort of years, but we're noticing some areas there that we're obviously really keen to support some of our young people in. In terms of moving forward, there's a lot of focus you've touched on there in terms of the youth advisory groups and areas like that. I think it's really, really important that we keep an eye on that age group, particularly that sort of 16 plus, particularly if they are, you know, if they've been going to school from primary one, they've always had a teacher and an adult that they can relate to, guidance teacher, a additional support teacher, and then they're in the big bad world. And the big bad world for some our young people is very scary. Maybe not always linking into feeling of suicidal, but that sort of feeling of being lost. And I suppose that's probably our third finding from when we come back from Slovenia, that's not alone. It's not a Scottish issue. This is out there. But I'm really keen over the next couple of years to dig a bit deeper in that as an organisation, to see if what we can do to support this age group so much better. But I don't know if that's been anything that you've found in any of your work across the country, if there's similarities there.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's from my work across the country or the fact that I have 3 queenagers, as I call them, from 19 to 23, 24 years old. And I guess, you know, there's no getting away from the fact that, you know, young people have, over the last few years, you know, despite, and as well as any other issues that they might be facing, have, you know, had a disruption through schooling. They've you know, been excluded from their friendship groups because of the lockdowns and things. You know, COVID was a difficult time for all of us, but if you're in your formative years and you're trying to work out who you are and where your place is in the world. If you're shut in your house with your parents, then or shut in your house with whoever, it's not not an easy place for them to have been through. And then they come into cost of living crisis, the environmental crisis, all these wars in Ukraine, war in the Middle East, all these things have an enormous impact, I think, on young people, because they are seeing it.
Yes.
Every single minute of every single day.
More than any other generation.
Absolutely. It's it's there, and they're also a generation where, and I'm not being critical of social media, because I think it has a huge amount of positive to it as well. But I think they are the generation who don't feel they can put their social media down, and because they need to be on call to all their pals 24/7. So with all of that going on in their lives, it's really no surprise that things might be really difficult for them now. I think within the action plan, we have an action for this year to build our understanding of what's going to help for young people, so that we can then go into thinking about what actions we need to take. So our academic advisory group are working on a bit of work just now, sort of reviewing a sort of systematic review of what the research is really telling us, looking at what's effective in schools, what's effective in youth work settings, because not all kids go to school. What's effective in other settings for them, thinking about peer support as well. How does peer support work for younger people? Because I've seen some brilliant examples of that. And, when I was the suicide prevention lead in Borders, we did some safe talk training in one of our local schools. It was a 17-year-old at the time who came and supported me, because he had been on assist, and those kids were just absolutely brilliant, and really got it, really understood what it meant, and then themselves went on to do interventions with their friends. My own youngest daughter did assist earlier this year, and she has since used those skills to support people at university. So I think the opportunities for our young people to actually be the leaders in some of this as well is important.
Yeah.
The other part, I think, is, for me, suicide prevention is one part of what's going to support children and young people. What we do through the Creating Hope Together strategy is only one part of it. So it's really important that we are connected up with the Mental Health Directorate more broadly in Scottish Government. So we're connected in with what the Joint Strategic Board for Children and Young People's Mental Health will take forward, and thinking about suicide prevention as being some of that, really early intervention, really preventative stuff, well-being for children and young people, all the early years work that's happening. And before that, the perinatal work as well. So I think, making sure that we've got the right things at the right points, and we might not see the fruition of that in a couple of years' time. I think we're looking at a couple of generations' time, but I think we need to do that work now to really see the difference and to support our young people, because I wouldn't like to be that age now. I'm glad I'm the age I am.
And I think one of the biggest take homes from just my own personal perspective in terms of young people and maybe not seeing the impact until later on. I worked for another charity locally in Inverclyde, sort of 2017. A couple of years I was in there, it was great. Working in schools, working with young people. And a lot of those young people that I worked with in 2017 provided some support. They've actually come back to see me and man on. Just for a coffee, tea, some of them actually accessing help, support, whatever's there. But the impact of that relationship to them. And we read about it, don't you? You go on training courses, you read about it in books, you hear from Bruce Perry about the importance of relationships and the brain connection, but actually seeing it in action for the job that you're doing with other people and the impact is huge, and it's sometimes years later that's there, and I think it's really, really important that we have it in our heads for this age group, because certainly 12-year-olds that I worked with in 2017 are now coming back to me as sort of vulnerable, young adults who are needing support, but actually they're struggling to find their way in the world and where they can get that help from, because it can be quite confusing for them.
it's difficult to ask for help if you need it. Do you know, it's really difficult to ask for help if you need it.
Yeah.
Like I've got a knackered back, and, you know, some days I really struggle to put my socks and shoes on, and, you know, I've had that since I was 19. So it's not like something that's new that I'm trying to get used to. And I will doggedly, you know, get myself in all sort of contorted positions to try and get my socks on without having to ask somebody else to help me. You know, so it's difficult when you are needing help to ask for it. And if it's difficult for me to ask for somebody in my family to help me put my socks on in the morning, when they know I've got a knackered back, do you know, the thought of, or how difficult it is for people when they're struggling with their mental health, where there's still some, you know, stigma and taboo around that, to be able to put your hand up and say, I need some support, and, you know where to get that even is, you know, it is a difficult thing. So, you know, I think if we can encourage people to reach out and ask for help, but also encourage, you know, whereas human beings, we're very intuitive. We know when people are struggling, so don't wait for them to ask. Do you know, just go and ask and see if they're okay, because building those relationships means that they'll reach out again in the future. And I think it's that is a huge thing. Do you know, if you've got somebody who's coming back to you now when you saw them when you were 12, you know,
a good few for different reasons, and maybe some just to, you know, say that they're doing well. Others maybe needing help with something. But it's a nice feeling, that, and that was one of the main reasons for us driving forward the young person service in the local community, because I felt that it was needed. You know, that just the open door policy, you know, being able to chat the door and get help when we're open. Obviously we're not 24/7, but it's been something that we're really keen to drive forward next year, without a doubt, because again, that age group, we've done some work in some of the colleges as well. And we're really keen to be, you've touched on some of the training, but the Safe Talk and the assist, we're really keen to start delivering that out to younger people as well, you know, the young adults, because again, just like you've experienced there with your daughter, you know, young people will seek out other young people for help and support. So
they're not meant to come to us old folk. You know, they are you know, the evolution of the human being means that they will go and seek their peers out before they seek out a grown-up to come and help them. So, you know, I think the more that we can support and educate them, the better, because they are the ones that are doing it. Whether that's what we want them to do or not, you know, I think one thing that always really struck me was this, you know, feeling from adults that I was discussing doing work in schools in my previous post was, you know, well, we can't go and talk to them about suicide. And I was like, they're already talking about suicide. And if we educate them, then they're talking about it in the right way, and they're getting people to the support and help that they need. And, you know, I think that was one of the best things that, you know, we ever did was, so the young lad who came and helped me when he was 17 is now much older than 17 and is one of our greatest assist trainers. He's delivering loads of assist training up and down the country, you know, week in and week out, and you know, his skills as an assist trainer are, you know, top notch, and he did that from a really early age. And I think, you know, even seeing somebody who was young and who has, you know, gone through and carried on and stayed and delivering this work, you know, I think that's an inspiration to lots of young people as well. So shout out to Kevin, because he's brilliant. And all assist trainers, and myself and Sam had the fortune of being able to go on and do the 5-day train the trainer in Stirling Court Hotel, and it was an experience, you know. It wasn't just like this sort of, maybe you go to a train the trainer and it's maybe a day, or, you know, it was a sort of full-on experience with a group of people that were still in a WhatsApp group, you know, we're still connected, I've met a couple of them down at the office. Some of them are really blown away by what we do, and we were blown away equally by a lot of the work that they'd done. A lot of them were from sort of Aberdeen area as well, so it was really nice to hear about what's going on across the country.
But that was an experience and a half in terms of going away, focusing solely on that. The downtime was good as well, but there was a lot of reading time, there was a lot of focus. There was a wee bit of pressure because you had to deliver as well. But the team were, you know, Marie and the other ones who were involved in it. Alan, obviously from Ireland as well, he was great. An amazing experience, I think, the sort of residential, I think they call it, don't they?
Yeah, and, you know, I did my assist training back in 2004. I think I'm possibly still in recovery. My youngest was 6 months old at the time, and I thought, oh yeah, beauty, I'm getting a week away in a hotel, I might get some sleep, and then realised just how much hard work is involved in becoming an assist trainer. And it, you know, it is one of the best learning experiences I've had in my life. You know, it taught me so much. It built connections with people that, as you say, I'm still in touch with now. You know, it'll be my 20-year anniversary next October from delivering my first assist. And I still do assist on a regular basis. It's important for me. It's not part of my job now, but it's important for me to be out and to be working in that way. Because it gives me a bit of satisfaction that I feel like I'm, you know, passing on those skills and knowledge to other people.
And you're close to the ground though, aren't you?
That's the real benefit for me, is being, you know, hearing, and I don't just do it in Borders, although I do a number of assists in Borders. You know, I've delivered across the country this year, so that I'm hearing from different people what their experiences are, you know, what's happening, what would make a difference, and that, I think, you know, makes me better at my job. When I go back to it, because I'm coming from an informed place. I'm able to say that this is how it is working on the ground.
Yeah, and I think for me, just as a sort of trainer, practitioner, the feeling of then going and delivering it is huge. Yeah. I mean, myself and Sam delivered, and I'll do a shout out for Sam on this, because this is Sam's bag, without a doubt. This is his skill set. Watching him in action, delivering it, was amazing. It was really powerful. And we done a sort of half internal with some externals as our first one to try and test the water. And we've got a few more booked in the new year to get the kind of training wheels off, if you like. But the delivery of it, the feeling on the Friday when we had finished the 2 days, and the feedback from people, and you could tell quite quickly they were fully engaged with the process. So for us as an organisation to be able to go and deliver it, it meets so many of our sort of strategic objectives, but again, it allows us to get into the ground in our community and understand what's there for people and network, even in a local level. So great experience, great learning. And also I learned a lot about myself that week, that I don't actually do downtime well. And it's like, right, go practice a good thing tonight. And I'm like, done the FaceTime to my wife and kids. And I'm like, what did I know? Other than read the stuff. So, but no, it was a great week, a great experience. And we are so thankful and appreciative of the opportunity. Obviously, we continue to deliver that. So we've got a few more booked in the new year. So if you're ever in Inverclyde and you fancy delivering an assist,
just give me a shout.
Great. Brilliant. So we touched on a wee bit there about networking and other organisations. And one of the things I wanted to touch on was the role of the third sector and your role, how it links with yourself. And probably a wee bit in an Inverclyde context, there's so many organisations that are providing amazing work, whether it be peer support work, other organisations doing similar stuff to support people in various ways, like Your Voice, for example. They do lots of peer support groups across the community. We've got Mind Mosaic, who deliver the sort of adult services, Mind Mosaic Children and Families, who deliver for young people, and also Safe Harbour, who are working with people in our community to support them through wellbeing, might be suicide prevention. For me, the third sector in Inverclyde, I'm biased, but the third sector in Inverclyde for me is really, really strong. When you go to networking meetings locally, I'm kind of blown away a wee bit when I come away at the amount of support that's there. In your role, in terms of, you know, the view from your position, how important is the third sector in helping deliver a lot of the work that, you know, you're focusing on? Yeah.
So I think, you know, when I described there earlier around, you know, my role and where that kind of came from, I guess one of the other things that we really recognised as we were doing all the engagement to develop the strategy was that breadth of third sector input across the country. And it's huge. You know, I think what you see in Inverclyde is replicated in many areas. And you know, we talked earlier about lived experience, and often those organisations are set up on the back of somebody's lived experience and wanting to do something and wanting to do, you know, I guess as I did, wanting to make a difference and to stop, you know, people experiencing suicide. So, you know, we made the decision to think more broadly about how suicide prevention is delivered in Scotland. As I said earlier, it doesn't just happen because we've written a nice strategy and action plan. It doesn't even just happen because we've created a sort of leadership team, which is myself, and then, you know, Samaritans, SAMH, Penumbra, Change Mental Health and Public Health Scotland, who are, you know, sitting as strategic outcome leads. It doesn't just happen because we've got local suicide prevention leads across every local authority area in the country. It happens because there's lots of stuff happening across the country through, you know, third sector organisations. I don't mean to be disparaging in any way, but often small, you know, organisations who are, you know, could be one person who on a weekly basis opens up their front doors and has a cup of tea and a biscuit for folk who are struggling. And you know, those kind of organisations are stretched across the country, and I think it's really important that I'm not there to tell them what they should be doing, because, you know, what they feel they need to be doing is coming from, you know, in the same way that it did for you, Chris. You created something because there was a need for you and for your family, and you could see that need in your community. You know, all these organisations have kind of come from the same place. I think what I see my role in is helping them feel part of, you know, Suicide Prevention Scotland, the delivery collective that we're trying to create, and creating those opportunities for them to come together to share their experiences, because the conversations I've had have often been very similar, you know, things that they're struggling with, things that have gone well, but, you know, things they'd want to get a bit of extra information about. So if we can create the opportunities for that to happen, you know, I think that's our role as a sort of, or my role as the national delivery lead. And to help then, I guess, see where that all contributes, to be much more explicit about how that contributes to suicide prevention in Scotland. I don't have a huge pot of money, I wish I did, but we have, Scottish Government have doubled the investment over this Parliament into suicide prevention, and we do want to see that money, you know, beginning to filter down. So it's not just sitting with those outcome lead organisations, but then recognising how those partnerships with other organisations can support some of the work. And that, you know, also includes organisations who are working with, you know, traditionally marginalised communities. So how we can hear more from them as well about what's going to be helpful for them to support suicide prevention activity in their organisation. So, you know, I think we're at the early stages of it. We had a meeting or a session a couple of weeks ago for organisations who are working with those marginalised groups to really hear from them what the inequalities feel like for their communities, and how we can then, you know, support some of the suicide prevention work in their communities. And we'll hopefully have a report out of that in the new year. And then at the end of January, we'll have a bigger event for you know, charitable organisations, third sector organisations across the country to come together and to hear. You're going to be one of the presenters on the day, hopefully, and you know, just to hear what works well, but what some of the challenges are, because I think you know, we talked about peer support in terms of individuals. Part of peer support is also about supporting other organisations, you know, because I think when you're a wee organisation up in Lochaber or somewhere else, you know, remote or even in the centre of Glasgow or Edinburgh, you know, you can often feel like these things are only happening to you. And I think understanding that this is a sort of normal experience for organisations working in suicide prevention, I think will be important.
Yeah, I think that's the event. I got the email, obviously I was off, but picked up the email when I came back about the January event. And I think it's such a worthwhile exercise to do that and try and bring organisations together, because anytime I do networking, it might not necessarily be focusing on suicide prevention. It might be a broader sort of mental health, well-being aspect. But you do tend to find that the same issues are there. So having a space, it might snowball into other stuff, you know.
I hope it does.
Yeah.
You know, this is not intended to be a one-off, in the same way the session for around inequalities will not be a one-off. It's, you know, I've described them both very much as a first step, you know, and thinking about, you know, part of what that session will do is to be thinking about what do next steps look like. What, you know, we've created this day. Is that the kind of thing that people want, or do they want something different? You know, we've worked with our local suicide prevention leads over the last few years really to understand what their needs are. You know, we have local area guidance now available. We have induction packs available. We have, you know, sessions that we do specifically for them around topics that they have an interest in, like data and evidence and things. And so, you know, we've created space for them. We have a monthly drop-in session that they can come to or not as they wish. And they get an update on what's happening nationally, but they also have a chance to talk about some of the challenges or positive work that they're doing locally. And I think that's helped them feel better supported, because they are often individuals just being the only person working on suicide prevention in their local authority or health board. And so to have that peer support from others across the country, I think has been really beneficial for them. And so, you know, that's what works for them, but what's going to work for our third sector partners, you know, that I'm open to hearing what that is and thinking about how we can facilitate some of that for the future as well.
No, that's brilliant. And I think for us, you touched on funding. Obviously, more funding the better, but you touched on funding, and something that's been really strong for us has been the Scottish Government's Mental Health and Wellbeing Fund. More so for our adult-based services, sort of 16 plus, some of our young adults obviously getting covered in that. We've just recently found that we're going to get a year 3 of funding for that, which has been vital. For one of the areas that I was looking at for this is a sort of younger version of that. Is that something that potentially, you know, these sort of focus groups are doing, we could actually try and maybe have a focus on? How do we try and get some funding to support that younger age group? Yes, for suicide prevention, but obviously that mental health and wellbeing aspect, because it's been life-changing, life-saving for Inverclyde. I know that some of the organisations that I've mentioned, I went to a mental health and wellbeing fund event in Inverclyde, and I was blown away by the impact that all the organisations were making. But I was wondering, what about young people? I know there's other funds, but it was just a thought around that funding for our younger people in our community.
Yeah, and so I think there is a fund, a communities fund for children and young people, and that goes through local authorities rather than as the adult one goes through the third sector interface. And again, that's for local authorities to decide how that's going to meet local needs. So how it's delivered is very different. And it, you know, we know that up and down the country there is that investment in children and young people's mental health and well-being that, you know, is also making a difference. It's you know, as I said, it's operated in a different way.
Right. Okay. Makes sense then.
Yeah, and I think there, you know, I talked earlier about the Joint Strategic Board, which is, you know, a new iteration of the work around children and young people's mental health and well-being, and I think that will be, you know, the real driver of work around you know, support for children and young people, and we'll be making sure the suicide prevention work's really firmly tied into that. The Communities Fund has been phenomenal. I think there's something in the region, and I can't quote the exact numbers, but somewhere in the region of about 1,900 projects that have been funded through that across the country, 300 of which have identified as being for suicide prevention. Now, you know, if they're the only organisations that are delivering suicide prevention, that's still a phenomenal amount of work.
Yes.
And I know there are many, many more who haven't had funding through that pot. And I think, capturing some of that and really being able to demonstrate the impact that that is having for people as well as, it's kind of key, because we're often measured against the number of people who die by suicide.
Yeah.
But those figures never capture the number of people who don't die by suicide. And it's an area, it's almost impossible to demonstrate that. I think we have to just understand that we are, as you said, saving lives through a lot of this work. And we would never know what the rate would be without all of that. So I think it's great. The investment from Scottish Government in those types of things like the Communities Fund, even things like the baby box, that ultimately should have an impact on future generations' mental health and well-being. So, all of these things I think are really important parts of the puzzle, that we're not just looking at the funding that goes out through the suicide prevention budget, because that's a drop in the ocean compared to everything else that's going around.
But no, I think it's been crucial for us. A big part of what we are starting to work on and sort of, I suppose, for us really drill down on and drive forward is the data and the evaluations. We know it works because people tell us, we've got the evidence because they're still here, despite coming to us and feeling suicidal. But for us now, there's a real focus and shift on data evaluation. If you would have spoke to me in March 2020, I would have just been like, I just want to create a support group here. But now I feel we've got a wee bit of a responsibility to share the stories, of why it's worked, so that we can maybe help other people, so that we can learn, develop a bit more. So evaluations for us is going to be crucial. And I think that the fund that we're discussing has driven a lot of that. It's driven a lot of that to get us to think about not just about numbers, because I think maybe historically, how many bums have you had on seats, basically. That's not what the focus is now. It's about why is it working, and how can you do that. So we're doing some work with sort of Public Health Scotland just now around that, but also doing a wee bit of work on our own stuff to try and work it out, because I think sharing that's very powerful. And a lot of this sort of suicide statistics, although it is obviously a person for each suicide and a family for each suicide, it does focus on, completed suicides or deaths. But there's a wider story around suicide prevention that I think is really important that we can share.
We had I'm sure they won't mind me talking about this, but we had a conversation as part of our local suicide prevention leads discussion last week. And, I'm not the only one who's been around for nearly 20 years now. And I think we've been pretty rubbish at doing evaluation of the work that we've done over those 20 years. We're so busy doing the work and getting, like you're saying, starting a group, getting things up and running and what's the next thing? As soon as that thing's up and running, we're moving on to the next thing. Which means that, we aren't able to, despite having nearly 20 years worth of work in Scotland, we aren't able to say, oh, look, there's all those things that have had the greatest impact in Scotland. And, so I'm absolutely focused on making sure that we evaluate now the work that we are doing through the strategy, and we're working on that at the moment, and with colleagues in Public Health Scotland and others, to really make sure that we're not just collecting the numbers. We are actually thinking about, if we've got an outcomes focused strategy, we need to understand how the work we're doing is impacting on those outcomes. In a hope that we are better in the future. I'm not sitting here in 5 years' time saying we're really rubbish at doing it. We did also have a conversation, as I said, at the Suicide Prevention Leads meeting, and I think it's very difficult. It's within the Scottish nature, isn't it, to not brag about the work that you're doing and to not
just go on with it and just do it.
And I think even more so in the context of suicide prevention. None of us working in this world want to see anybody die by suicide. So, when we do see the numbers, it hits us as individuals, especially if you're working in an area where you've been really knocking your pan in, to be quite honest, to get things set up, and then the numbers are up on a previous year, and that that is really difficult then to kind of keep going and to feel that it's okay to say, actually, I know those numbers are up, but what we're doing we think is going to really impact for the future. As we've talked about, it might be a generation away. So it's a difficult area to also stand up and say, we're doing some really good work here, because as you say, every single one of those people who've died by suicide, that's a horrendous experience for their family and those, their workplace, their friends, all those who are connected to them. So, I think we have to be sensitive to that, but we also have to, if we're not telling people what we're doing, then people don't know it's there. And so when they're feeling suicidal, they don't know where they can go and get some support. So I think we have to be much better at it. And I think, organisations like yourself are, I think, better at saying, this is making a difference, and so we need to keep doing it. And I think I certainly have learned a lot from that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we do that. I mean, that's going to be a big driver for us as we try and understand, why people keep coming to us, or maybe why people have went to other services, maybe statutory services. It's not clicked. What's the difference coming to us? How can we make it better for the people that's maybe came once and not come back? So we're trying to understand a lot of that. So next year for me, we'll be focusing on a lot of that work. So hopefully be in a position to share it. One of the bits that I wanted to touch on was around sort of crisis response and how we as a sort of community can support people better. And one of the things that I read a few years ago now, but really liked, was time, space, compassion. Can you tell us a wee bit about time, space, compassion for people that maybe don't understand what that is? Because for me, it sort of really made sense to a lot of the work that we do about, making support for people as easy as possible. And it doesn't need to be, an expert or a guru that talks to people to make them feel better. But yeah, just a wee bit about time, space, compassion.
Yeah, so I guess that came from a bit of work from Every Life Matters action plan, which was around a crisis model for Scotland. And as we did the sort of research and spoke to people with lived experience, particularly around that, about what, a model of crisis support needed to look like. There was no one model that came out as, if everybody just does this, it'll be perfect across the country. But the three things that repeatedly came out were that people needed the time, they needed the space, and they needed to be shown compassion. And so as we were sort of pulling all of that evidence together, we were like, this is not rocket science, but actually it's what people really need. And they feel that when they get that, that's what makes the biggest difference for them. So that when whether they are in crisis or not in crisis, actually being treated in that way is so important. And I think, it is difficult as services are stretched. Sometimes these are the things that become more challenging to do. So we created, hats off to Linda Hunter for leading this work, time, space, compassion approach that is available. If you Google time, space, compassion Scotland, that'll come up. And that is, it was written for, with a view to how we support people in crisis. But for me, it's how we should all be working, especially if you're in the public sector. Giving people enough time that they are able to explore, what's going on for them, having a space that makes that conducive. Whether that's an online space or an in-person space, or just having this space to talk through what they need to talk through and to be shown compassion. These are things that we all need at all times. So I think as we take that work forward, thinking about what does that mean for unscheduled care. So in places like accident and emergency, the police, ambulance service, what does that look like for them? What does it look like in primary care? So when you go to your GP or to somebody else in your GP practice, what does that mean there? And what does that mean in communities? Because time, space, compassion are things that we can all do. I think suicide doesn't happen just because you have a mental health issue, and not everybody who is suicidal has a mental health issue. They might be struggling with their finances, they might have rubbish housing, they might have fallen out with their families and friends, so if going to a mental health service isn't going to help people who are in those kind of situations. But what will help is your neighbour or your local clergy or a local service being able to offer you a bit of time, space and compassion to work through what it is you're feeling. I think, if we can all do a bit of that, then wouldn't the world be a lovely place?
Without a doubt, and it's what people repeatedly tell us, maybe in different phrases, different words, but, just having the time to come in, just knowing that you're there, you're listening, that you're attentive. I think maybe people are reflecting that they've maybe not had that in other places that they've been to, because there is a stretch or an expectation or a pressure. But when I read things like time, space, compassion, and it appears very, very simple, but for whatever reason it's not always practiced. So for me, it just really reinforced what we were doing was the right thing at that point when it came out, and I read it and obviously seen some video clips and shared it with the team about, like, this might seem simple, but actually it's based around this work that's obviously getting recognised wider. And for me, that space element of it, just having the space to be able to have it, but also the physical space for us has been crucial in terms of the community. And time for us is important because we've been pushed and pulled so many different times from funders or from other people. How many sessions do they get? You need to put a time limit on it, and we're like, look, we've got an open door policy. Yeah. We try and give people the tools. If we don't see them again and they're doing well, great. But people know that they can come back because we'll make the time for them and we'll show them the compassion again. So, yeah, I think for me, I just wanted to touch on it because it's been a really important part of developing a lot of your work at Man On. And I think the three areas are absolutely crucial if you're wanting to support people in crisis. Yeah. Despite there not being maybe a nailed-on model, I think if you do these three things on a regular basis, you'll probably be okay. And this is the message that I say to staff. So I just wanted to touch on that. Another bit I wanted to touch on for us, just a sort of shameless plug for our sort of football therapy, but also our other projects that we're starting to kick on in the community in terms of sport. We had a visit from Marie Todd recently, obviously Minister for Mental Health and Sport, and we had a chance to talk about our work in terms of the Scottish Government Mental Health and Wellbeing Fund, but we had a chance to speak about our sort of integrated approach really to physical health, mental health. In terms of yourself and your role, what sort of link do you feel that sport has in terms of suicide prevention?
Yeah, so I think, we need to make sure we've got a range of things happening across the country that meet the needs of different people. So, in terms of connection to sport, our FC United work through United to Prevent Suicide, I mean, that took off in a way I don't think anybody expected. And, we're looking at what comes next with that, because that was a way...
Massive movement, that.
Massive. I like the fact that we...
Seen so many people with the T-shirts.
Exactly. So we created an image of a T-shirt, and suddenly everybody wanted to buy them. And so, we created the strips so that people had them. And that, that's a visibility. Whenever I'm wearing mine, on a bus or whatever, people kind of look and they're like, oh, what's your football team? Because that's what it looks like. And it starts a conversation about suicide prevention. So, I think it is really key that we have those. And I think so areas like Lanarkshire have run football tournaments for years around Suicide Prevention Day. Lots of other areas are connected. And so I know in the Borders, we don't do football in quite such the same way, but really connected into the local rugby teams. Yep. And, there was a video around some of the work in the Borders that was put out in June. And one of the projects that was highlighted was the one in the local rugby clubs, because that's where people go, it's part of their normal life. And if we can get conversations around mental health and suicide happening in those areas, then it normalises it and it makes it okay. And that's before you even begin to get into the huge benefits of exercise on people's mental health. If you are, struggling with your mental health and you go to your GP, one of the first things they should suggest is exercise. And And, you know, getting outdoors, because those are really core things. We know they can have a big impact on people's well-being. So, you know, I think there is a huge connection with sport. And, you know, I had a conversation with the chief at the Scottish SPFL, can't remember what all the words are, with her around, you know, some of the work that they're doing, and she's been a key partner in the work over the last few years as well, and will continue that relationship with football, but also thinking, what other sports, how do we get in? Sam H are one of our outcome leads, and obviously they do a lot of work around sport as well. So changing rooms, and you know, Chris Hoy is one of their ambassadors. So but really beginning to understand how we can tie in some of the messages around sport and suicide prevention. You mentioned earlier the communities fund. A lot of the projects that are happening through that are for, you know, activity and getting outdoors, and I think that's, you know, that early intervention prevention side of things really key as well. So I'm all for it. Not exactly the fine figure of a sportswoman myself, but you know, really recognise the benefits of even getting out and walking, and it can have on your mental health. Yeah,
I mean, there's so much to it. I think probably where we're coming from it and where we have came from it, Man-Ons as a football term, was the idea, the sort of the name for the charity I came up with. Basically, you shout Man On, there's somebody close by you on a park. It's usually an opposition player, right enough. But it was to get that sense of community. In one of our first groups, we went out to the community in May 2020 on SurveyMonkey. We went out and asked everybody, what would you like? And it was like sort of focused football groups. So we tried the walking football early on because of the COVID restrictions. And then our sort of first group was football therapy, which essentially is just a football sort of 7-a-side, but we've got 30 plus people who come to it. But the flip side of that is that it's allowed people to connect in with us in other ways that they maybe wouldn't have in the past, or without that sort of tick of the football, because we'll have our volunteers there, we'll have potentially Sam there on a Monday, we'll maybe have other people who are there who may be representing at different peer support levels, and it just gives a wee hook into the other stuff.
So it's that relationship thing that you spoke about earlier, isn't it? They're building a relationship with you through something that's okay. Do you know, like there's no stigma attached to going to a football group. So, you know, being able to kind of use that, as you're saying, as a hook for people, you're building that relationship, and it helps them then feel more able to talk about the things that they might be struggling with. And, you know, I think any way that we can normalise it and make it okay, then you know, we should be taking those opportunities.
Without a doubt, it's a big bit for us next year is taking it forward for our young people and young person services. I think there's a big opportunity, probably sort of 15 plus, for a lot of young people who are still connected with football, but they're maybe disconnected with education, or they're disconnected with other things, but they still go to their football 3 times a week. There is other sports in Inverclyde. We've got a great relationship with the Greenock Wanderers Rugby Club. So we're trying to look at various ways that we can connect with people, and I think sports just an area that we want to continue to do that in. But it's good to hear that there's still a lot of focus around, because we know about changing rooms, we know about the other work that's happening across everywhere else. But for us, it's going to be a core part, I think, moving forward, as part of our projects and part of our funded projects as well, which is great. So we've got the January event, which is happening, which is coming soon. As I said to you, I was bombarded by emails this morning when I opened it up about the event. Are you going to this? This will be good. So we're looking forward to potentially playing a part in that and coming forward with some of the team into Edinburgh, isn't it? Yes. So looking forward to that. But moving forward, just generally your role, we touched on it at the start. What's your sort of plans? What's your vision? Are you looking far ahead? Are you just trying to get through obviously the next bits? How does it look for you?
So I think, you know, we obviously have a delivery plan for our current financial year, so that will run till, you know, beginning of April next year, and there's some sort of key foundational things in that will help us then do some of the other stuff that's in the action plan over the coming financial year. So all of that work is kind of happening. Building those connections, I think, are really key, not just with, the third sector and the organisations we've already talked about, but other national partners who are working in and around areas that are connected into suicide prevention, and making sure that we are more explicit about the role of suicide, or the impact that their work might have on suicide prevention. Because I think that's the other element. It's often hidden. They'll talk about mental health and well-being without actually recognising that if we're getting that bit right, we're probably going to be saving lives further down the line. So I think, I'm really keen to see how we are much more explicit about how
upstream
all the work
approach
is really affecting. And so do I look far ahead? At the moment, I'm looking forward to Christmas, because we could do with a couple of weeks off, but I'm constantly like, what can we do next? What can we do next? And I think we've got the roadmap set out with our action plan for the next, till 2025, but that'll come around really quickly. And so thinking ahead as well, what else do we need to put in? What goes in our next action plan to make sure we are taking this work forward and continuing to improve what we're doing. I have this sort of quality improvement methodology that always kind of ticks through in my head, and I guess it goes back to that, what we were talking about, people not saying how good the work that they are doing. Because I'm constantly like, right, what's next? What's next? What's next? So I think we will focus on trying to achieve the outcomes that we've got set out in our outcomes framework, the shorter term outcomes, but just thinking to what comes next. And our academic advisory group have a horizon scanning function built in, so also hearing from them about what's emerging and what's the sort of new stuff we should be looking to as well. So always pushing for more. And I think the opportunity, as I've said, to build relationships. You've talked about relationship building in that one-to-one space, but I think it's really important for me to be building relationships and with as many organisations as we can. So we can really bring suicide prevention to the fore.
Yeah, no, massive. And I think, anything that we could be doing from a Man-On perspective, whether it's a January event or other stuff in Inverclyde, connecting some of your Inverclyde organisations together. We've got CVS Inverclyde, who are our TSI, they're amazing, they do a lot of great work. It'd be good to focus a bit more, I think, locally on suicide prevention, actually, in terms of understanding what everybody's doing and how we can support each other better. But anything that we can do to support it, great. And thank you for your time. Also as well, thank you for your service in suicide prevention, something that I'm very, very passionate about. I've been passionate about it, I would say, probably most of my life, from about 11, 12 when I was aware of it, and aware of the impact that it had. But to speak to somebody that's committed basically their career to suicide prevention is an honour. So thank you for everything that you do in suicide prevention, and we look forward to continuing to work alongside you.
Yeah, and thank you, Chris, because without organisations like yours, the work I do would be a bit meaningless. So I think it's important to sort of pay respect to all the organisations up and down the country who are, committed in that way and who want to make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for everybody who works for you as well.
Thank you. Cheers, Haylis. Thank you.